My name is Sophie Mercer. I'm 34 years old. 2 months ago, I stood in a rooftop garden decorated with fairy lights and floral centerpieces, surrounded by 140 of my father's colleagues, old friends, and business associates, and watched my mother step up to a beautifully arranged podium and say, "Sophie has always marched to the beat of her own drum. We just wish that drum came with a better salary." The crowd chuckled. My father shook his head with an amused smile. My sister crossed her arms and smirked. And my husband, the man they had silently dismissed as irrelevant for 5 years, gently set down his glass, pushed back his chair, and rose to his feet. What happened next made my father's closest business ally go completely still, made my mother's smile dissolve entirely, and made my sister finally understand why Sophie had never once come to her family begging for help. But before I take you there, please take a moment to like and subscribe, only if this story is speaking to you. And I want to know, where in the world are you watching from, and what time is it right now? Tell me below. Let's go back to where it all began, 7 years ago, the evening I met Daniel. I was 27, still dusty from a long Saturday spent at a community arts center where I volunteered on weekends. My favorite bookstore was hosting a small author event, and I had promised myself I would go even if I showed up in paint-stained sneakers. The venue was packed with people browsing, chatting, sipping coffee from paper cups. I squeezed into the back corner and found only one available seat, next to a quietly intense man scribbling into a worn leather notebook. "Is this taken?" I asked. He glanced up, sharp eyes, easy smile. "All yours." "We barely spoke that evening," he wrote. I listened to the author's talk, but as the crowd began to filter out, he closed his notebook and said, "You have good questions, you should come to the next one." I wasn't even sure I had said anything out loud, but I came back the following month, so did he. Over the next few months, we ended up at the same events, the same little bookstore cafe corner, the same tables in the back. He told me he worked in technology. I told him I was a social worker, helping at-risk youth navigate the system. He never mentioned money. I never asked about status. It was quietly, completely refreshing. Nobody in my family had ever made me feel seen without first cataloging my accomplishments, my salary, my prospects. Daniel saw me in that dusty, paint-stained jacket and seemed genuinely interested in what I was actually saying. When he finally asked if I wanted to grab dinner, I said yes before he even finished asking. We spent 2 years exploring the city, cheap noodle shops, hiking trails, free museum days. He lived simply in a clean apartment. He listened like it was the most natural thing in the world. When he proposed, I didn't tell my family for a month. I already knew how it would go. "He works in technology," my mother said, her voice careful, her disappointment unspoken but deafening. "What kind of technology?" "Startups and stuff," I said. "So a developer, or like IT support?" She exhaled. "Sophie, I just hope you know what you're doing." Daniel never tried to correct the assumptions my family made about him. When I asked him why, he simply said, "I want your family to love me for who I am, not for what I have. If that's not enough for them, that tells us something important." I understood it intellectually, but in practice, living through 5 years of family dinners where Daniel was politely ignored while my sister held court, it wore on me in ways I hadn't fully admitted. The pattern at every gathering was the same. My sister Victoria would arrive like weather, filling every room she entered. "Mom, tell me what the Caldwells said after the pitch," she'd say, leaning over the table like she was already in a boardroom. And my mother would oblige with pure delight, recapping everything in breathless detail, $3.5 million in new investment. The table would glow with pride. Then, with the same breath, my mother would glance my way. "And Sophie, still doing the youth work?" "Yes," I'd say. "I actually just helped a 17-year-old navigate out of an abusive home situation last week." "That's wonderful, honey," my mother would say, reaching for her phone. The second sign was more personal. "Last fall, the community center where I worked held an awareness evening, showcasing the stories of young people who had survived some of the hardest circumstances imaginable. I had helped organize it for months. I invited my parents. "Dad, it's on the 8th, Friday evening. It would mean a lot to have you there." He opened his calendar app at the table. "We have the Caldwell function that night, Soph." These things happen. He had attended 4 of Victoria's corporate presentations that year. I had stopped counting, but Victoria hadn't. She told me at brunch one Sunday, smiling gently like a knife. "Dad was saying he worries about you, that you're burning yourself out for other people's problems when you could be doing something more sustainable." She meant profitable. Daniel was sitting next to me. He heard every word. His jaw tightened, but I had asked him not to cause friction. That night, he held me in our small apartment and said, "Your work is not a problem to be solved, and you are not a charity case." But all those small slights, all those politely devastating moments, they were just rehearsals for what was coming. The occasion was my father's 35th business anniversary. A milestone event hosted on the rooftop garden of a boutique hotel downtown. My sister had helped organize it naturally. When the invitation came, it was an automated email, no personal message. Victoria got hers on cream cardstock inside a velvet envelope. She shared it on her social media with the caption, "Celebrating a legacy." My mother called that afternoon. "Sophie, I've sorted the seating. You and Daniel are at table 11. I looked at the venue plan she had sent. Table 11 was along the far edge near the service corridor, half shielded by a tall floral arrangement. "Mom, that's practically behind the flowers. We need the center tables for the business partners. The Caldwells are coming. The Nguyens, people your father actually works with." I held the phone tightly. "And Sophie, when you speak to guests, just keep it light. Some of these people have very specific expectations." She meant don't embarrass us. She hung up before I could find words. That night, I sat on the edge of our bed and stared at nothing. Daniel came in and read me instantly. "Behind the centerpieces, right?" I laughed despite myself. "Yes." He sat beside me. "Do you want me to come?" I had been protecting him from my family for years, and it hadn't made anything better. "Yes, please." He took my hand. "I've stayed quiet because you needed that from me. But Sophie, if they go after you again, I will say something." He wasn't angry. But there was a steadiness underneath his words that I had never quite heard before. "Marcus, what are you not telling me?" He looked at me calmly. "I think it's almost time." Almost time for what? But I didn't push. Maybe part of me wasn't ready. The night before the party, I lay awake thinking about the family I wanted someday, the children Daniel and I had talked about. What would I tell them about dignity, about silence, about what it means to love yourself? I thought about the last family dinner, the one where Victoria had announced a new client acquisition and everyone had toasted like New Year's Eve. And then she had leaned over to me and said, just below a whisper, "You know, Daniel doesn't even have a LinkedIn profile." What kind of professional doesn't have a LinkedIn? Daniel had heard it. His shoulders stiffened slightly, but he said nothing because I had asked him not to. Later that night, he stood at our window in the dark. "Sophie, this isn't sustainable." "I know," I said. "I know." The morning of the party, I opened my email and found a forwarded message my mother hadn't meant to send me. It was to Victoria. "Keep table 11 away from the Caldwells tonight. Daniel always looks like he doesn't belong and at Ma." The room fell off. I read it twice, and I understood then that my silence wasn't keeping the peace. It was simply making room for their cruelty to live comfortably. The rooftop garden of the Alton Hotel was exactly the kind of setting my father loved, aspirational, impeccably designed, with panoramic city views, strings of warm Edison bulbs, long white linen tables, a string quartet playing near the bar, and 140 guests in polished clothing, holding champagne flutes and talking about portfolios. Daniel and I arrived at 7. He wore a well-fitted gray suit. I wore a deep blue dress I'd had for 3 years. At the elevator, my mother was receiving guests like an ambassador. She wore champagne satin and a string of pearls. "Sophie," she kissed the air near my cheek, "I'm glad you could make it. And I see you brought Daniel." "My husband, yes." Her smile stayed perfectly in place. "Table 11, sweetheart." Past the arrangement near the corridor. We moved through the crowd. I could feel the glances, the brief assessments, the soft recalibrations. That's Sophie, the one who does the nonprofit work. Her husband, nobody seemed to know. Victoria stood near the center of the space in a wine-colored gown, one hand holding a glass, the other resting lightly on our father's arm as if already accepting an inheritance. She saw me and smiled in that particular way, warm on the surface, just slightly sharp underneath. Table 11 was worse than I expected. The centerpiece blocked the sightline to the stage completely. Every few minutes a server would pass so closely I had to move my chair. The couple at the nearest table glanced over. The woman, polished, mid-60s silver jewelry, seemed to look at Daniel with a flicker of something. Uncertain recognition. I'd seen her before. Sylvia Nguyen, one of my father's top investors. She tilted her head. "Do we know each other?" she asked Daniel. "I don't believe so," he said. She narrowed her eyes slightly, reached into her bag for her phone, began searching. The lights dimmed before she said anything else. Victoria appeared at our table just as my father took the stage. She carried her champagne flute like it was a prop she had been practicing with. "Sophie, you actually made it. Why wouldn't I? It's Dad's event. She tilted her head with a small shrug. You always seem a bit stretched thin, that's all. Her gaze moved to Daniel. Daniel, how are things? Good, thank you. Still doing the tech stuff? Still in technology, yes. She smiled. That's great. Really? Solid career. She said solid like it meant something lesser. Not everyone has to be climbing the corporate ladder, right? She let that sit. The main thing is you seem happy. She finished her champagne in one clean motion. Try to enjoy the night. She walked back toward the stage just as my father began to speak. The string quartet fell silent. The crowd gathered. My father commanded the room easily, always had. 35 years, he began. 35 years of building this company from a single leased office into what it is tonight. The crowd responded warmly. He talked about risk, patience, the discipline of showing up when it would have been easier not to. But none of it happens in a vacuum. He gestured toward the front table. My wife Carol, who kept everything standing when I was certain it was falling. My mother touched her pearls. And our Victoria, his voice lifted. The one who was sitting across from me in boardrooms before she graduated, who has the same instincts I do, frankly sharper. Victoria smiled with practiced modesty as the cameras clicked. She's the next chapter of this company. He paused then, looked across the room, found my face. And our Sophie, he said, a long pause. Sophie has always cared about people. She just sometimes forgets that people also need to eat. Laughter, cautious and confused, moved through the crowd. I felt my face go still. My father recovered quickly. I mean that with affection. Sophie is passionate. She cares deeply. Maybe one day she'll find a way to make that practical. He smiled at the crowd. You love all your children differently. He raised his glass. To family and to building something that lasts. 140 glasses rose, and I sat behind a floral arrangement at table 11 while they toasted. When I looked over at Daniel, his chair was already empty. He was standing. He straightened his jacket calmly and began walking toward the stage with the particular steadiness of someone who has been patient for a very long time. Heads turned. Whispers gathered. Who is that? My father saw him coming. His expression tightened. Can I help you? Daniel stepped up beside him. He looked at the crowd without hurry, without performance. I just need a moment. My father forced a smile. This isn't really the time. Daniel spoke into the microphone. I disagree. His voice was quiet and clear, and it carried perfectly. My mother moved forward from the front row. This is inappropriate. Daniel turned to the crowd. My name is Daniel Mercer. Sophie's husband, the one you don't know anything about. Nervous laughter from the edges of the room. My father's smile became strained. Daniel, there are 140 people here. Why don't we? My father reached for the microphone. For 5 years, Daniel said, taking a small step so the microphone stayed with him, I have attended every family gathering. I have listened to jokes about my career. I have sat at table 11 behind the flowers. He looked at me across the rooftop. I stayed quiet because Sophie asked me to, but I won't stay quiet anymore. Victoria pushed forward. This is insane. Security doesn't need to be called. Daniel raised one hand. I'm not making a scene. I'm introducing myself since your family never offered me the opportunity. He reached into the inside pocket of his jacket. My breath stopped. The envelope. He held it but didn't open it. First, I want to say something directly to this room. He looked at my parents. I work in technology. That much you know. What you don't know is that I build infrastructure. Not apps, not IT support. He paused. I build the systems that other technology companies run on. Sylvia Nguyen made a sharp, involuntary sound. She was already standing. She stared at Daniel, then at her phone screen, then back at Daniel. Is that? She stopped herself. Just a moment ago you didn't recognize me, Daniel said to her gently. She shook her head. I do now. She held up her phone toward the crowd. The name on the screen was visible to those closest to her. Victoria squinted. She typed something on her own phone. Her face changed. What moved across it was not embarrassment exactly. It was recalculation. My father leaned toward my mother. Helen. Carol, he whispered. His composure was slipping. I have no idea who. Sylvia spoke to the room now, her voice carrying. This is Daniel Mercer. The Daniel Mercer, founder of Bridgeframe, the tech infrastructure company. It was named the most quietly influential company in the industry last year by Wired magazine. Murmurs traveled fast. My father looked genuinely lost. That's not possible. Diana never. Sophie, Daniel said calmly, correcting my father gently. Her name is Sophie. He opened the envelope then. He held up a document, thick, folded, official. This is a partnership letter, he said. Bridgeframe is funding a 3-year initiative through Sophie's organization, partnering with youth social services programs across 6 cities. The first city is here. He looked at me. starting with Sophie's center. Tears came before I could stop them, not because of the announcement. Because someone stood in the middle of a room built to celebrate achievement and said, "This woman's work is achievement." Victoria whispered something I couldn't hear. My father looked at his guests, his investors, his legacy, and for the first time in my memory, he looked uncertain. "Sophie is not a person who forgot to be practical," Daniel said, returning to the original wound. "She is the most practical person I have ever known because she builds things that last." He held up the partnership letter. Not buildings, not portfolios. People. He set the microphone back in its place and walked toward me. The crowd remained absolutely still. When he reached table 11, he took my hands. "I should have said this a long time ago," he said quietly. "They don't deserve you. But I want you to know that I see everything you do." "Daniel," I had no words. "I am so proud to be your husband." Behind me, I heard my mother's voice, small and unsteady. "Sophie, why didn't you ever tell us?" I turned to face my parents. They stood together near the stage, older somehow, less certain. "Would it have mattered?" I asked. "Of course it would. Would it?" I felt something crystallize in my chest, not rage, just absolute clarity. "You have minimized me at every table, at every dinner, at every event for my entire life. You have spent years implying that my work is not work, that my choices are not choices, that my husband is somehow less." I looked at the crowd around us. "And right now, after tonight, you are interested. Not because I changed, but because you found out that my husband is successful by your definition of the word." My mother's eyes were wet. I couldn't determine whether the feeling was genuine or situational. "Dad, you said I forgot that people need to eat. I eat fine. I have always eaten fine. I just never needed you to be the one feeding me." My father opened his mouth, closed it. "This is a misunderstanding," he tried. "You seated us behind the flowers," I said. "You forwarded an email to Victoria about keeping us away from the Nuyens." Daniel took a breath. He'd seen the email. He knew. My mother pressed her hand to her chest. "That was, I know what it was." I stepped toward the microphone. Daniel moved with me, one hand at my back, steady and silent. I looked out at the crowd. My parents' world, their business partners, their old friends. Every face turned toward me. "Good evening," I said. "I'm Sophie." The unpractical daughter, soft, uncertain laughter. For 34 years, I have attended every event in this family as a guest, never quite as a member. I was assigned tables in corners. My work was used as dinner table material, a gentle punchline. And I smiled because that seemed like the easier thing to do. My voice was solid, steady. "Tonight you found out my husband is successful. I'm glad you know. But I need to say this clearly. Nothing about tonight should have needed to happen. What my husband does for a living does not determine whether I deserved your respect." I looked at my mother, my father, my sister. What I do matters. It has always mattered. I go home at the end of every day knowing that. I took Daniel's hand. "I'm asking for something very basic from this point on. Not admiration, not performance, just respect, consistent and unconditional." He looked at my father. "If you can offer that, we can find our way forward. If not, then this is where we part." We walked out together. The rooftop was behind us. The elevator doors closed. We didn't speak until we reached the street. The city was alive around us, cabs and foot traffic and the sound of distant music. "Are you okay?" Daniel asked. I thought about it honestly. "I think I'm lighter," I said. "Not because of what they found out about you. Because I finally said what was true." "That's not small," he said. "I know." My phone lit up steadily the whole cab ride home. 19 calls from my mother. 8 from my father, 4 from Victoria. I played my mother's first voicemail. "Honey, please, this all escalated far beyond," she paused. "Please call me back, it was a misunderstanding." My father's message was brief and even in crisis, practical. "Daniel seems like exactly the kind of partner we should be speaking with. Let's arrange dinner, the 4 of us." I deleted it. Victoria's text read, "I cannot believe you let it get to this point. You could have told us. How is this on us?" I showed Daniel. He read it and said nothing for a moment. "She genuinely believes that," he said quietly. "I know," I said. I turned my phone over. Let the silence hold. The fallout moved quickly through the city's business circles. The story traveled, as stories in that world always do. My father's firm had been positioning itself for 2 major partnerships that season. Within 10 days, both had quietly gone cold. The companies cited other priorities, but the people who knew, knew. Sylvia Nguyen's team withdrew from a development proposal my father had been cultivating for months. She sent a brief note, professional and final. Victoria was reassigned from a high-visibility client pitch. The project lead said nothing directly, but the message was clear. She sent me a series of increasingly long text messages. I didn't respond. The one call I actually picked up came 2 weeks after the party. It was from my father's older sister, my Aunt Ruth. She had left the family business 20 years ago to run a literacy nonprofit. The official family description of her life choices was politely heartbreaking. "Sophie," she said. Her voice was warm in a way that surprised me with its immediacy. "I heard what happened. I'm glad it happened." I asked her what she meant, because someone finally said it out loud. She told me, "Your father has always valued the visible over the real. I've been saying so for years, in quieter rooms. He doesn't hear me. Did you ever say it to me?" I asked her. She was quiet for a moment. "No, and I'm sorry for that. I thought protecting you meant not adding to the weight, but I was wrong. Protecting you would have meant standing beside you." I was crying before she finished. Not from sadness exactly, from the recognition of being known. "I always thought your work was the most important thing anyone in this family was doing," she continued, "and I should have told you every single time." "Thank you," I said. She exhaled. "Sophie, family is not about the name you were born into. It's about who tells you the truth. And Daniel told the truth in that room. You told the truth in that room. That's family." After the call, Daniel found me on the kitchen floor, back against the cabinets. He sat down beside me without asking. "Good tears?" he said. "Yes," I said. He put his arm around me and we stayed there a while. Quick pause. "Are you on team Sophie should give her family a second chance, or team they have to earn their way back? Drop your answer in the comments. I genuinely want to know what you think. And if you're still here, you care about this story, so subscribe if you haven't. What happens next might change your answer. 3 weeks later, I agreed to meet my parents. I chose a small cafe near my office, familiar to me, neutral for them. They arrived before I did and were already seated when I walked in. My father was wearing a casual button-down, not a suit. My mother had no jewelry on except her wedding ring. They looked somehow like people. I sat across from them. I had considered bringing Daniel. I decided not to. This was mine to do. "Thank you for coming," my father said. His voice was careful. "Thank you for not choosing the restaurant," I replied, a small smile from him. I deserved that. My mother leaned forward. "Sophie, we love you. I know you do," I said, "but love isn't the part that was missing." My father rubbed his hands together. "We were hard on you. We pushed. We had expectations." "Yes," I said, "and the expectations were for Victoria's version of my life, not my own." He didn't flinch. "That's fair. I need something specific from you," I told them. "Not a grand gesture. Not a business partnership." I looked at my father deliberately. "Real interest. In what I do, in who Daniel is as a person, consistent curiosity, not just when it benefits you." My mother nodded. "We can learn," she said. "I know it's late." "It's never too late to start," I said, "but it also never gets easier if you keep waiting." They understood. That night, Daniel and I sat on our narrow balcony with a bottle of wine and the city spread out below us, quiet in the way only cities after midnight can be. "How do you feel?" he asked. "Honestly, I feel like I've been carrying a very heavy piece of furniture by myself for decades, and tonight someone finally helped me set it down." He smiled. "And your parents?" "I don't know yet," I said. "Maybe they'll change. Maybe it'll be partial, uneven, slow. I think that's okay. I think I can wait for real without needing it." He refilled my glass. "Cheers to that." We sat in comfortable silence, the kind that only comes with genuine ease. I thought about the kids at my center, the ones who came in carrying things nobody their age should be carrying, and how the small, consistent moments were the ones that actually changed something. The daily showing up. The regular acts of being seen. I thought about Aunt Ruth, who had done that work for 20 years and never once been applauded for it at a family dinner. I thought about Daniel, who had built something enormous and kept it quiet because he wanted to be known for the right reasons. And I thought about myself, Sophie Mercer, once the unpractical daughter, now something I didn't quite have a word for yet. But it felt like mine. Completely mine. "Daniel," I said. He looked over. "I'm going to be okay." He didn't smile. He already knew. And that is where this story lives now. Not in a ballroom, not in the fallout, not in the apology, but in the quiet balcony moment where I finally stopped waiting to be validated and started simply being. If you've ever felt invisible to the people who should see you most clearly, I hope something in this story reminded you that being unseen by them was never a reflection of your worth. Thank you so much for watching all the way to the end. If this story moved you, please give it a like. It truly helps more than you know. Subscribe so you don't miss what comes next. Share this with someone who needs to hear it. And leave a comment below. Have you ever had to stand up for yourself in front of the people who were supposed to be in your corner? I would love to hear your story. See you in the next one.